College football fans, this is sacred territory this week, rivalry weekend in college football. Enjoy all the games, all the action. Some of them don't really matter when you talk about championships, but again, the fabric of the sport is all about rivalries. We got Bill Bender on the line from the Sporting News. We encourage you to check out Bill's work. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. And like you said, rivalry week, there's so much angst and anxiety and aggression. It's like this is Thanksgiving week. It's always fitting, maybe it's I'm looking forward to it. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you, and we can jump right into it.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. So the college football playoff rankings were revealed on Tuesday night. A couple things stuck out to me, and that's that there's an avenue, a path now for the ACC to get in 3 teams, because you figure if Clemson has already reached that 12-team threshold and they've got a data point out in front of them that's going to be awfully impressive in South Carolina. So they moved ahead of, surprisingly to me, Alabama and Ole Miss, or I should say Alabama and Ole Miss dropped below them because I don't think the Citadel win catapulted Clemson, that especially if Miami loses this ACC championship game at number 6, there is really no justifiable way to drop them all the way out of the playoff. And then you've got 3 teams from the ACC.
Right. And I had Clemson around like 15. So like the committee clearly likes them a little bit more.
17.
Yeah, so I think we're probably close to agreement. I don't even know if they should be favored against South Carolina. I know they're at home. That's a good South Carolina team they're playing. And I love the scenario, Mark, where South Carolina could beat Clemson. Clemson could back into the ACC championship game if Miami loses. And Clemson could beat SMU and get the automatic berth 2 weeks after Dabo said it's the SEC Big Ten Invitational, and they could be sitting there with 3 losses and losses to South Carolina and Georgia and have like a 4 seed or even a 3 seed. That is what the new playoff world has created. Interesting scenarios like that one.
Yeah, especially for these teams that have those rivalry matchups in the ACC and the SEC where they don't play a conference game the final weekend of the season. Then they schedule a cream puff the second to last weekend of the season. So they wrap up their conference schedules in mid-November and are just sitting in the clubhouse, per se. In the Big 12 had an opportunity the last 2 weekends, but in many cases, the wrong team won, i.e. Kansas won. And so the SEC losing, you look at the 3, we can start to relate this to the NCAA basketball tournament. The 3 bubble teams in the SEC lost over the weekend, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Bama. But over the last 2 weekends, BYU's lost a couple games. Of course, Colorado's gone down, or else they could have elevated.
Right. And, it's created this mess. I told you, I'm getting into the Big 12 tiebreaker scenarios. There are a bunch of them. I mean, the simplest one is Arizona State wins and Iowa State wins and they go play each other, and that's easy. I didn't catch wind of it till this morning. I didn't really think about it, that like Tulane in theory could leapfrog those teams and the Big 12 could be left out of the playoff. I think you and I agree that probably won't happen. But if this Big 12 has like a bunch of craziness happen, which we've seen the last couple of weeks, not out of the question. I dismissed the idea that Boise State would have the 4 seed. And I still think the Big 12 champion would get that seed, but they have to win the games. You have to win. And I really like this Arizona State team right now. I think they're being a little underseeded the way they're playing. I understand they lost to Cincinnati, but if you watch them play the last 3 weeks, they got a really good quarterback, Sam Levitt, making good decisions. Cam Scatterbo is about as fun a running back to watch in the country. And then they got Jordan Tyson on the outside. That's an exciting football team. And Kenny Dillingham, he's a young one. He's fiery. He gets on a lot of viral clips, but that's a good football team.
Bill, I don't know that we've seen a group of 5 team get as much respect as Tulane with 2 losses. So they've got the 2 losses. They are to Oklahoma, but a 6-5 Oklahoma team, and to Kansas State. And to be all the way up to number 17, typically somebody with their resumes more in the low to mid 20s in those last 3 or 4 positions. And to your point, at 17, they play Memphis. They're going to get some style points, I guess, for Army. Who knows where Army's fallen? They've fallen out of the top 25, but I don't know if they're hanging at 26 or they're in the abyss somewhere at 44 after getting blown out by 5 touchdowns. But I agree with you that the nightmare scenario for the Big 12 is that a losing team from this weekend then wins the Big 12 championship next weekend.
Yeah, and I didn't even, again, I just didn't even think about that, because you let some of that go over your head. You just are conditioned to say Big 10, SEC, ACC, Big 12. And good point about Tulane too. I remember watching the Kansas State game. I was up at Michigan, Texas, watching the end of that, and I thought they could steal that one. They played well at Oklahoma. They are playing very good football under John Summerall right now. I've been telling people for a couple of weeks, he's not an up-and-coming coach. He's like here. He was doing this at Troy. He's doing that at Tulane. I think he'll end up in the SEC somewhere at some point, leading a major program. He knows how to win. And Boise State's kind of floundering a little bit. I think that's the door that could open up for Tulane more than bypassing a Big 12 school, is Boise State losing one of these next two games. Maybe they lose the finale. Maybe they lose to UNLV or Colorado State in the Mountain West Championship game. They're flirting with it. They didn't look real good at Wyoming, and they've got to be more than, as good as Ashton Jeanty is, they've got to be more than that here in these last couple games.
Bill Bender stopping by from the Sporting News. We get together every Wednesday, and so look out for these posts later in the day on Wednesday each and every week. Appreciate Bill. Check out Bill's articles on the various tie-breaking scenarios as we head through rivalry weekend, and then on, of course, to the conference championship games. Bill, I was reminiscing with the various podcasters here in the last couple of days with various live streams and records about the good old days. Ohio State and Michigan could show up for their annual showdown at 8-3, let's say, and most of us were giddy and happy to watch that game. And maybe there was a Rose Bowl on the line. Maybe there was a third team involved in some kind of tiebreaker, but it was just fine for us. Just, I was mentioning the 1981 game. Arch Schlechter scores a touchdown with a couple minutes left, and a ragtag kind of Ohio State team, by Ohio State standards, finishes 8-3, and they tie for the Big Ten title, and they beat Michigan, and all was well at that point. But the times have changed. There are people out there that say, lose to Michigan, miss the championship game against Oregon, your seeding's still going to be okay, and save all that wear and tear and get ready for the playoffs.
That probably will actually allow the players to play a little looser, I think. Having that, know that, hey, yes, it's a big game. No question. This is the most important game on the schedule for both teams. Ohio State, I was there last week against Indiana. This is a really good team, really quality team. Defense is amazing. Really choked off Indiana after the first drive. I think their next 17 plays went for -3 yards. They got a lot of experience. They remind me of Michigan in some ways last year. They got all these experienced guys on this defense that are playing well and playing connected at a high level. Will Howard's been a great asset. I look at his last 5 games, 75%, averaging about 220 yards, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. That's not Heisman caliber, but that's good enough to win anywhere caliber. He just very well. And I don't know. I think they're connected. I think a lot of people are expecting a blowout. I'm not, because I know better, right? You can't just say Ohio State's going to kill them and then speak it into existence. They have to go out and do it. I don't think Michigan's going to come in there and lay down. I think their biggest issue is Wolverines can't pass. You look at the big games they played this year. They barely got over 200 yards passing against the teams, Oregon, Texas, Indiana, Illinois. Those are the losses. Washington. It's not like they've lost to bad teams, is my point. And they've got a really good defensive line. They'll come in there and play. I just don't know that they can do anything that Indiana didn't do, and Ohio State should be able to stop that.
Yeah, I think the path to victory is for that defensive line for Michigan to really dominate Ohio State's offensive line, take advantage of those injuries, although the Buckeyes have adjusted extremely well, considering arguably their 2 best offensive linemen are out, and really muck up the game. And Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, well, he's had a lifetime, a history, a career in and of itself of playing Ohio State. So if they can find some magic there, some special plays for Donovan Edwards and supplement that. They did throw the ball 35 times against Northwestern. Most of it was just dink and dunk. Tyler Morris,
right.
Frederick Moore. kind of stuff. But
I mean, that got my attention, Mark, didn't it?
yeah,
I mean, like if they don't beat Northwestern 50-6, I probably pick Ohio State to win this game like 40-10. And that may very well happen, but it got my attention enough. I actually think Ohio State's path to victory is they need to run the ball, but they need to also, the way to beat Michigan is tempo, quick pass, accurate quick passes, use your receivers. Your receivers on the outside are better than Michigan's corners. And Will Johnson probably not going to play. I don't know for sure, but I mean, he hasn't played. There's been no indication that he's going to play. Michigan's 5-1 when they hold teams to 100 yards rushing or less. They only lost to Indiana, who they shut down on the ground. So I just hope Ohio State doesn't get into a habit of forcing the run. You know what I mean? Just for like, we got to be tougher. We got to do this, because you play into Michigan's hands at that point. You're not. It's going to be tough to run the ball. They've got to really. This is the best defensive line Ohio State's faced.
absolutely. Bill Bender here, breaking down Week 14 with us. Rivalry weekend, folks. Enjoy it. Catch Bill's work at the Sporting News, obviously. And please like and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Can you make any separation or distinction between these Big 12 teams? Even beyond the teams that are tied for first place, the next 4 or 5 seem like, okay, send any of them to the playoffs. And once we get a result out of the Big 12 in the playoff, it's reasonable to say there's like 6 other teams that could have shown up, whatever that result is, and done the same thing.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mentioned I liked Arizona State. I was off Iowa State because they had a little bump, and now they're favored to beat a Kansas State team who I kind of like to beat Iowa State this weekend because they can run the ball. BYU had their blip. I mentioned BYU on this show a couple times, how much fun they are to watch, even if they lose. So I think they're a team to keep in mind. And then you go all the way down to Colorado, who's the most glamorous team of all. And here's something I'll say about them. They probably won't get to the Big 12 championship game, but I kind of love that Dion was saying, even if it doesn't happen, I love that he was saying, yeah, Shedeur and Travis are going to play in the bowl game. And I was just talking this through with my editor. Colorado doesn't do the things the way you and I would do them, or how anybody would do. They do the things the way that they're going to do them. So would it surprise me if Shedeur and Travis Hunter played in the Alamo Bowl or the Las Vegas Bowl? Probably not. So, and that means they'll give them a good matchup, by the way. They'll give them Ole Miss or whatever the best Big Ten team they can give them. That's who they'll put in the bowl game against them.
And the college football purist out there, who many of them disdain Dion at this point, should gain a little respect back if they're going to show up full throttle for a bowl game. I would love that. That would be phenomenal there. When we look at the SEC teams, what amazes me, and I always like to look for the lowest ranked team that has a path, and that's Texas A&M. Even though they're down at number 20, they can still go through and win the SEC championship. But do those resumes, is there one resume that stands out or level of play out of those 3 or 4 that are mixed in there?
I think you mentioned Texas A&M being at 20. They're fun. The Big 12 teams, they're self-explanatory. If we were in South Carolina is the team that has played awesome the last month of the season. They are the type of team that I thought this format was built for. Get hot late, maybe have a couple tough losses. Remember when they lost to Alabama, our narrative was, oh my gosh, Alabama's playing so bad. Maybe it should have been, hey, this South Carolina team's pretty good, and Lenore Sellers has turned it on in the last month of the season. I would like to see for them to find a way to backdoor in. I think they're locked by losses to Ole Miss and Alabama, right? So they played a really tough schedule. We can talk a little bit about Indiana if you want. They're pretty much in, and it wasn't until you said something I guess it is feasible for 3 ACC teams to get in. I don't know if it will happen, but that would be kind of amazing. But the one thing, Mark, I wanted to say about Indiana is there is a separation. They are the classic case to me. There's a separation between good enough to make playoff and good enough to win a national title. I don't think they're in Ohio State zip code. competitively. And that maybe they will in a few years, and we can talk about the end of the game if you want. But afterward, went to Kurt Signetti's press conference, and he was fine. He wasn't arrogant. He was complimentary of Ohio State. He talked about, he mixed in some, the refs missed a call here, and he defended their playoff, worthiness. And this was right after Ole Miss lost. So I agree with them on that. They're a playoff team. They're just not, I would say, we could do a list together if you want. Here, the teams that I think that are truly national championship caliber are Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, Georgia, and I'm missing one. Oh, Oregon. I missed Oregon. So Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame, Georgia. And I just don't know that Penn State's that. So I think those 5 teams are national championship caliber. Why did we get rid of the 4-team playoff? I don't know. Because the rest of them, I think, are just playoff teams.
Yeah, so for me, I'm right there with you, except if I'm going to include Notre Dame, I would include Penn State until
Fair.
I see something different. I think they're fairly
Who
aligned.
would you pick if Notre Dame played Penn State? Would you pick Penn State to win?
Penn State and Notre Dame?
Yeah.
Neutral site. Yeah, I think I would pick Notre Dame.
I would too. But if they somehow 7-10 that, or like 8-9 that, it's probably at Penn State, and you probably give the advantage to the Nittany Lions at home. So I think those two are very similar. And if you want to make it a 6-pack and put Penn State in that top 6, okay. And then those are the teams that could probably win the national title. I'm not sure anybody else can.
So, Bill, we'll hit on the topic you just alluded to a second ago at the end of the Ohio State-Indiana game. I've had a few people mention that Ryan Day's trying to prove something and that he doesn't need to prove anything. He's got arguably the best team in the country, arguably the best program in the country. Why don't they just play and let the performance stand for itself? He doesn't have to prove that they're tough or that they're going to shove it in somebody's face.
Right.
What do you make of all that?
A couple things. I'm just not a fan of doing that at the end of the game in general. And he's not the only one that does it. Dan Lanning did it to Michigan. Dan Lanning called a timeout, then did it to Michigan. James Franklin does it on a regular basis at the end of games. He did it to Kent State earlier this year. And I'm more of from the practical standpoint of Travion Henderson just slid down at the 1-yard line. You're almost showing him up. You know what I mean? Like, just kneel, get out, go home. I always point back to, fairly certain this is accurate, when Ohio State played Michigan in 2018, they were up 62-39. Urban really had a chance to go for 70. And that would have went into like the Woody Hayes part of the lore. Man, he went for 2 up 68-39. He nailed it out though. And that's a coach that had 3 national titles at the time. I think Ryan Day doesn't have anything to prove, but he still has in the back of his head that Michigan game from 3 years ago where they got pushed around. And he's said that out loud, right? Like, we got pushed around a few years ago in Ann Arbor, and it's this constant need to prove that they're tough when, if anything, by all that stuff at the end of the game, they kind of validated who Indiana was, right? They didn't, I would have just, if they just kneel there, then you look at that, I would have looked at that game, Mark, like they just treated Indiana like Northwestern or Purdue. They, business like win. Instead of by making a show of it, you've showed that, hey, Indiana's at least on your radar, right? That's how I looked at it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting thoughts from Bill Bender. Catch his complete work with the Sporting News, and you got all the X handles down below. Bill, happy Thanksgiving, and enjoy, of course, all the games this weekend.
I didn't get a prediction from you. I put 31-13 Ohio State, and I think it could be worse.
Oh, I think it could be worse if it's a standard football game and logical thinking about the separation between these two teams. But I do play into the rivalry to a certain extent, and I'll go 27-13. I would take the points, and you reminded me of that Oregon-Michigan late score when many of us took Michigan in the points and weren't too happy about Dan Lanning's decision.
I did too. But they competed in that game, and Oregon was clear. I think this game could play out very similar, where Ohio State has them at arm's length, but isn't quite going to put the jug, go for the jug, whatever analogy you want to use. I do think Ohio State wins, goes on. Oregon, Ohio State, be a lot of fun, and look forward to it. I'll be there in the shoe, and you just don't take that for granted. When you've been able to cover that game as many times as I have, you always take a minute, pinch yourself, and be like, man, this is pretty cool seeing these helmets out here. It'd be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Once they hit the field, then all is right with football, regardless of what's going on with all the craziness of NIL and other things. When those kind of brands hit the field, absolutely. And it's going to be quite a brisk day, I understand, as well.
28 degrees, man. I have to get my winter coat out. I can't wait.
All right, Bill, have a great weekend. Good to see you, and we'll catch you next week.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on.